And we're glad to be joined by Mandy Gunasekara this morning. She was Chief of Staff with the EPA in the first Trump administration and has stayed very active politically. She is an author with the book Y'all Fired and joins us this morning. Good morning, Mandy.
Hey, good morning, Richard. Great to be with you and the listeners of SuperTalk.
I appreciate it very much. Certainly a familiar voice to SuperTalk listeners. I'd love to start here this morning. Going back to the end of last week, the Senate voted to take away California's ability to set up its own tailpipe emission standards, effectively killing the country's biggest driver of electric vehicle investment. Vote was 51-44. The House had already taken this bill up, and so it's headed to President Trump's desk. Automakers are hailing this a win. People with common sense seem to be hailing this as a win as well. As somebody who worked in the EPA, and you certainly have seen this story up close for a number of years now, what does this mean?
Yeah, so it's going back to where we will be operating from a vehicle emission standards under one national rule is how we characterize it back in the first Trump administration and what they're getting back to. What it is essentially prevented from happening is this disjointed marketplace where you had California trying to force electric vehicles onto the American public by virtue of the size, weight, and sheer of their economic power, which is significant. California represents about a third of the U.S. economy. So U.S. car companies, they were actually, when I first went in 2017, were some of the first groups that came in begging for relief from not the U.S. national standards, which were bad enough, those setting standards for greenhouse gas emissions and other affiliated pollutants for vehicles. They needed relief from what California was doing. And essentially, California, by forcing electric vehicles by virtue of their state-based laws, this is their climate change laws that are really out there. The California way of regulating is really irresponsible and not typically founded in reality, but founded in their emotional and activist based rhetoric. That is really how they set a lot of standards. It was creating a scenario where car companies were going to have to make either cars that complied with California or the rest of the country, and that just wasn't going to work. And what it did is it made the price of all vehicles go up significantly, and that undermines a lot of benefits like safety benefits. People can't afford the latest and greatest cars. This is called fleet turnover. If you don't have fleet turnover, the consumers can't enjoy the latest and greatest vehicle technologies from safety to environmental efficiency and on down the line. So this really is a great win for innovation to lead the charge in the American vehicle marketplace and not let California dictate to the rest of the country what type of cars we in Mississippi are going to drive, for example.
Well, and there's some that might characterize this as a shot at the electric vehicle industry. It's not that. It's a bill that gives consumers choice, right? I mean, ultimately, it's like, hey, if you like an electric vehicle, you're more than welcome to drive it, but we're not going to force everybody down this road in California or any other state.
Yeah, that's right. And I drive an electric vehicle. I drive a Tesla. I bought one a few years ago when Elon was about to buy Twitter. It was my little way of supporting his fight for First Amendment rights. But nonetheless, it works for me. I live in Oxford, Mississippi, and the furthest I have to drive is to Memphis. There's charging infrastructure. It works for me. It doesn't work when I try to go back home to Decatur, Mississippi. I drive our other gas-powered vehicle because there isn't a charging infrastructure, and I'm not sure where how I ultimately get down there. Yes, there's stops along the way, but again, you need to let consumers make that choice. You don't need the federal government forcing anyone into a type of vehicle that isn't going to allow them to safely and efficiently get from point A to point B. And that is the point of mobility. And you also, just to get a little legal on this, you have to go back to California. They had a special designation set up back in the 1970s when the Clean Air Act was passed. And there was a special designation that they could take advantage of because they had extraordinary and unique environmental factors that contributed to their smog. California was famous for their smog, and it has a lot to do with the fact that they're next to the ocean. They're on the West Coast, basically bringing in everything floating across from Asia. And then also the topography, the fact that they are essentially in a bowl alongside had a massive amount of people in a small contained sort of space. So the Clean Air Act gave them special state privileges to deal with those specified pollutants. But this is dealing with pollutants affiliated with smog. They took that, they abused it, and again, they tried to force California vehicles onto the rest of the country. And so this work by the House and the Senate as a Congressional Review Act, which means it'll go to the president, and EPA will not be able to issue a rule like this. The current one will go away. They won't be able to issue one into the future. That is a great win for consumer choice, innovation in the marketplace, and for letting the consumers decide if they want a gas powered vehicle, a hybrid, or an electric, what works for them.
You mentioned China a second ago. The world is a relatively small place, both like geographically and in terms of the way that we're interconnected. And obviously, the United States has tried to do some things that are environmentally sound to eliminate pollution and greenhouse gases and emissions and all of those things. But I'm curious with some of the research that you were involved with when EPA, when you have a country like China who just doesn't care, right? I mean, whether it's, with coal plants or trash into the ocean or whatever else, can the effect of the United States and some of its policies even make a difference in the larger climate pollution conversation when you have a country the size of China that's doing what it's doing to the environment? Or I'm trying to come up with a less crass way to say, whizzing in the wind. Is it like just dropping a cup of gasoline into 100,000-gallon pool? It really doesn't have any effect. You get what I'm asking?
I do, yeah. And I think it's a really great point that a lot of esteemed environmentalists miss, if you will. It's the fact that we could literally zero out the U.S. economy from an emissions perspective, stop, and that would have very little effect on what's going on from an emissions perspective globally. And there's a number of analyses. If anyone's interested, go to heritagefoundation.org and you can look up their climate science analysis. There's a lot of great work, but it would have no actual impact. What we can do is engage in technology sharing. And this has been a big focus of President Trump's. It's what we tried to do in the first administration. We faced all sorts of barriers. And what they're trying to do now is to share advanced energy technologies. The best thing you can do to lower a nation's emissions profile is realize the fact that coal, oil, and natural gas still provide the majority of energy if you're trying to build a modern society, but use that and develop that energy using the most efficient energy extraction and use methods. We have perfected that here in the United States. Things like hydraulic fracturing, the fact that our coal power plants, they have the latest and greatest pollution control technologies. You can do all these things with existing technologies. And the good news, Richard, you don't have to hand the reins of your economic well-being over to a small elite cabal of people that are trying to force electric vehicles, solar panels, or wind turbines onto the rest of the country that don't actually work and allow you to build modern societies.
While that cabal still flies on their private jets.
Right. Yeah. Yes. And lectures the rest of us that we just don't need to eat meat. Yes.
One last thing, and I think this actually dovetails nicely. The executive order that the president signed, I guess it was Friday, the nuclear energy executive order that rolls back some of the regulations that have been put in place with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I've only got about a minute left, but what was your reaction to that? I know that falls under Energy and Commerce more than it does EPA, which is where your strongest background is, but these two entities really work together.
Yeah, they do. And EPA has an oversight role. Look, the reason we don't have a bustling civilian nuclear system is because of overzealous regulation, primarily from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And there's been a lot of ideas and goals to pull that more so under the umbrella to reduce the size and scope of that agency itself and the affiliated rules. But the president's order, it's a great win for the use and advancement of small modular nuclear reactors, which are really the energy of the future. It satisfies a lot of problems. It's zero emissions. And so it checks a lot of really important boxes, but gives us the power we need today and the power we know we're going to need because of AI and the development of all sorts of technologies requiring more energy.
Mandy, thanks as always. Appreciate you joining us, even while you are on vacation. Hope you have a great week with your family, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Richard.
Mandy Gunasekara joining us on Mornings with Richard Cross right here on Super Talk, Mississippi. Quick time out. We're back with you after the break.